Everyone was seated around the big, candlelit dining table on that Christmas night, which I can still picture as if it were a moment. The room was filled with laughter. Plates clattered against silverware. The air smelled like cinnamon and roasting turkey. The house was beautifully designed, warm, and radiant. It had the appearance of something from a magazine. A picture-perfect holiday scene, except for me, of course. I was late. I didn't want to be late. Once more, it was because no one had offered to give me a ride, although I made my request 3 days beforehand. According to my brother, he was not going in that direction. "We already have too many people in the car," my sister-in-law remarked, so I rode the bus. I then walked the final 6 blocks in the bitter cold, carrying a small package of cookies I had made the previous evening. When I left home, they were still warm. By the time I arrived, they had become as chilly as the greeting I received. In the hopes that at least one person would notice me, I entered discreetly. However, nobody looked up. The cold had frozen my fingers, and the snow was still dripping from my coat. In the home of my family, I stood there feeling alienated. It wasn't the first time, and it made things worse somehow. After a while, I discovered a chair that was not quite empty. Someone had heaped coats on it, making it unfit for human use. I didn't inquire. I simply pushed them aside and took a seat quietly at the far end of the table, away from the toasts, stories, and laughter. Nobody inquired about my whereabouts. I didn't get a drink. Following dinner, we distributed presents to Uncle Mike, Dad, Mom, Jessica, and Brian, naming them one after another. Squeals and laughter filled the room. I sat still, awaiting. However, my name never appeared. Not once. Not even a card. What's the worst? Nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to give a damn. Did Santa forget you? My young cousin, who was perhaps 5 years old at the time, said as she gazed at me with her large, naive eyes. I grinned. I remained silent. I wanted her to feel comfortable. However, I was breaking on the inside. That evening, I closely observed my family. I looked at their faces, the happiness, the intimacy, the ease of belonging. And I came to the realization that I was constantly peering in from outside. I felt like a guest in a place I used to call home. Nobody waited for the girl. No one scribbled that name on a gift. The one that was overlooked. I went to the kitchen, unasked, to help with cleanup after supper. It was the only time I was recognized by anyone. Without even glancing at me, my aunt remarked, "Oh, thanks for doing the dishes." Naturally, when they didn't want to get their hands wet, I was helpful. And I did everything without saying a word, without complaining, as I always did. I had always played that part in the family. Keep quiet, compliant, invisible, not truly a part of it, but there. But that night, something changed in me, something silent. It was a moment of silence. Up until that point, I had never completely permitted myself to feel this thought. Why do I continue to strive for acceptance into a family that obviously does not want me? Perhaps it was the quiet. The cold might have been the cause, or perhaps I had finally had enough of acting. I took one final glance back as I departed that evening. No one even said goodbye. They continued to chuckle around the tree. They're still enjoying themselves, and I had the following thought. What I was going to do was unknown to them. I had no notion of who I was going to be. It wasn't precisely like that all the time. Long ago, I thought I was really no different from the others. I used to wait for Dad to get home when I was 5 years old outside the front door. Eager to show him what I had created, I would rush to him holding a drawing. Without saying a word, he would take it, look at it, and then throw it on the kitchen counter. Nothing I prepared was ever hung on the refrigerator by him. But Brian, my brother, he had framed his finger paintings. Then there was Mom. She braided Jessica's hair every morning before school. Mine? By the age of 8, I was able to do it on my own by using my teeth to twist elastic bands and using a borrowed phone to watch YouTube videos. "Honey," she continued, "you have such thick hair. It's simply too much for me to handle." However, I believe we both understood it wasn't the true cause. The firstborn was me. You would think that would have some significance. However, I was more of a stand-in in our home. I served as a constant reminder of a bothersome situation. Before Mom and Dad reconciled, an unfortunate incident occurred. They never intended to have me, I believe. The error was mine, the mishap, the one who remained silent and wore hand-me-downs, the person who received no recognition while earning consecutive as. Because no one offered to drive her, she stayed at home on prom night, the one who watched her siblings receive all the attention while she sat in the audience. The beauty queen was Jessica. The golden boy was Brian. Me, it was my responsibility. I was the one who took care of everything, the one they might leave behind or use to dump duties. I was 14 years old one July afternoon. Jessica had a party by the pool. There were dozens of people. The celebration included gold sprinkles on cupcakes, loud music, and laughter. They did not invite me. However, I was present because Mom needed help cleaning. We had to distribute the towels. After everyone had gone home at midnight, someone had to scrape punch off the patio bricks. I was always that someone. Furthermore, it made no difference how much I did. They never expressed gratitude. They didn't notice. Not in the way that counted, anyway. I tried to win their love all through my childhood. On birthdays, I made cakes. I made Christmas presents by hand. I took notes. When they needed space, I gave it to them. Except for the daughter they reportedly desired, I was everything parents could possibly want in a daughter. I applied to colleges on my own when I was 18. My essays were not proofread by anyone. No one asked me what I wanted to learn. With scholarships, I was accepted into 4 colleges. During dinner, I informed my mom. She didn't even look up from her phone. Nice, she remarked. When Brian passed his driving test 2 weeks later, she and Dad threw him a dinner. They bought him a new laptop and prepared steaks. I sobbed in my room that night because I wanted to make a difference, not because I wanted a laptop. I began to think that perhaps I was simply unlovable. Perhaps there was something about me that made ignoring me simpler. I wasn't noisy. I wasn't ostentatious. I didn't actively seek attention. I simply existed. And to be silent meant to blend into the background in that house. I remained near, though. I kept returning. I continued to attend events such as holidays, birthdays, and barbecues. I found their jokes funny. When my niece started crying, I hugged her. When Jessica needed aid, I took over. I hoped that things would improve. So I stayed. I hoped that eventually they would notice me. Choose me at last. However, what is the reality? They viewed me as they desired, secure, invisible, and helpful. The one who refused to defend themselves. Until I heard something one day that completely broke everything. After Thanksgiving dinner, that is. After doing the dishes once more, I went into the hallway to get my coat. At that moment, I heard Mom on the phone with someone. "We don't care about her," she added, laughing. "Unlike the others, she is not considered part of the family. She's simply all around. Just almost. Just." Something inside of me was broken by that one word. In an instant, all the years I had spent trying to keep it together, swallowing pain, and telling myself it was all right, fell apart. I stood motionless in the corridor. Something within me finally came out of that silence. "You have no place here." And you didn't. The sound was not bitter. It was not even angry. It sounded truthful. I was unable to stop hearing that reality once I had heard it. I was unable to resume my role-playing. I couldn't keep pleading with those who had already determined that I wasn't worthy of their love. That evening, I silently vowed to myself I would no longer struggle for their attention. Instead, I would fight for my future. And I knew in my heart, I wasn't going to go away in silence this time. Something changed inside of me after that Thanksgiving night, initially in a subtle way. I didn't shout. I didn't confront anyone. I refrained from crying in front of them. Rather, I began to observe. I observed how Jessica addressed me as though I were her personal assistant. "On your way, would you mind stopping over to get some milk for the kids?" As though I were her nanny. I was her unpaid intern. Never a sister. I observed that Brian only texted me to ask for help with his resume or to ask me to remind him of Mom's birthday. I saw how Dad only remembered to check in with me when he needed a co-signer for the stack of bills on the kitchen counter. I had been useful all my life. They saw me just in that way. However, I stopped giving after that evening. When Jessica begged for a ride to the airport at 5 in the morning, I declined. When Brian asked whether I needed help moving this weekend, I didn't respond. In my email, I didn't text to explain why I skipped a Sunday meal, and I let the phone ring when Mom called. At first, the silence seemed odd, as if I were violating some unwritten rule. It felt good, though, even liberating. I wasn't bending for once. I began staying late at work, offering to help with projects and going to all meetings, even the ones that were above my pay grade. I had worked at a modest logistics company for over 2 years. It wasn't ostentatious. It wasn't glitzy. It was mine, though. I did it well. Excellent. I knew what systems were. I knew what efficiency was. I knew what it was like to put in the work that no one saw. Does that sound familiar? My management didn't neglect me, but my family did. When I restructured the warehouse inventory system, he took note. He saw a 20% decrease in our late shipment rate in a single month. When I resolved a supply chain problem and saved the company 6 figures, he took note. He once called me aside following a quarterly assessment and asked, "Have you ever considered pursuing a career in operations leadership?" I gave him a blink. "Me?" He gave a nod. "You're smart enough for it. You have 10 more steps ahead of you. It's not common." I remembered that moment. I couldn't get it off my mind. Someone had faith in me because I had earned it, not because they had to or because our DNA was similar. It gave me a sense of purpose that I hadn't had in years. The dynamics at home, however, were changing, though nobody had yet noticed. Jessica was losing her mind. She was depending on Dad for financial support because her husband had lost his work. Brian was back to sleeping in his boyhood room after being laid off from his tech job. Mom was attempting to maintain appearances while being overburdened and yelling at everyone. And me? At last, I was establishing a solid foundation for myself. I visited the family business one wet Tuesday, not because I had to, but because my employer had requested me to meet with a possible supplier who just so happened to supply raw materials to my family's manufacturing business. It had been years since I had visited the office. I haven't been paid since I was 16 years old, when my father let me answer phones for experience during summer vacations. Something changed the moment I stepped through those doors. I was not recognized by the receptionist. "Who are you here to see?" she inquired with a smile. And I didn't glance down or stammer for the first time. I made it plain that Carwin Logistics is the reason I was here. "I oversee the optimization of the supply chain for your biggest shipping partner." She blinked. "Oh, naturally, this route." I moved through the corridors as if I were a native, since I did. Not as their daughter. Not like the one who is forgotten. However, as a professional, a force they had not anticipated, Dad was in the conference room when I walked in, as was Brian, who was feigning to be the operations manager, despite the fact that neither of us really understood the position. Dad looked up perplexed. "Why are you here?" I gave a courteous grin. "Just business." The brief meeting was instructive. Brian was unable to respond to my queries. Neither of them had seen the metrics I cited. I offered wording that elevated our business's position in their supplier chain. I saw Dad's brows furrow as he recognized that I wasn't merely stopping by, I was in charge. I was completely certain of something when I left that meeting. It's possible that they didn't want me in their family. However, they would require my assistance in their business. And I wasn't making the offer out of love this time. I was in a position of power when I negotiated. I didn't approach him yet, though. Avoid conflict. Don't reveal. Rather, the first opened a blank spreadsheet at home. I enumerated all of my knowledge about the business. The company's customers and its imperfections were among the topics I covered. The gaps inside, how it might break down, and how I could intervene if it did. I had no plans for retaliation. I was getting ready for a chance. The problem with living a life of invisibility is that people never notice you approaching. You've already altered the course of events by the time they recognize you. It most likely appeared as though nothing had changed from the outside. Despite being quiet, courteous, and forgettable, I continued to attend the occasional family dinner. I continued to bring a bottle of wine that no one drank, to nod when someone spoke to me, and to leave early without being invited to stay. I maintained the same grin. The tone was the same even. The same stance that they had taught me to adopt as a good daughter. But within, everything was different. I had given up attempting to win affection. I was doing some math. Unbeknownst to them, I was constantly taking stock of their finances, business updates, emotions, and anxieties whenever I entered that home. They continued to undervalue me. They continued to talk casually around me, presuming I didn't really get what they were saying. However, I paid attention. Nearly. Despite their lack of funds, Jessica was attempting to persuade Dad to grow the company. No one told the clients the truth, and Brian had blown a big deal by missing a deadline. Once more, Mom was using the corporate credit card for personal purchases, this time to plan an opulent getaway to decompress. The business was faltering. Ego and duct tape held it up. I began gathering papers. Methodically and quietly, I asked for public filings. I made contact with vendors. I talked to a friend who formerly worked as an intern at a law firm that specialized in taking over small businesses. She asked a few clarifying questions, just assisted me in structuring my prior knowledge into a coherent whole. I then went to see my employer. I practically spread everything out on the table. Lists of clients, irregularities in shipping. There are areas where regulations lack clarity, employee unhappiness, price gaps, flaws in the supply chain. They didn't believe I could access the data. So, what are you proposing? He asked me when I finished. A silent buy-in, I informed him. We'll provide assistance, take over operations, and simplify logistics. But after a while, we take charge. He gazed at me as if I had developed wings. You'd be in charge of it? I gave a nod from within. It won't be apparent to them until the ink dries. Impressed and perhaps a bit amused, he leaned back. That's chilly. I simply grinned. It's past due. I began to intentionally distance myself from my family over the course of the following few weeks. No more trips on the weekends. Last-minute favors are over. Don't act like the invisible girl any longer. They took note. Slowly. One evening, Jessica texted, Hey, I haven't heard from you. Is everything all right? I didn't read it. In a single night, Brian made 3 calls. The number was blocked by me. Mom sent me an email to inquire about my attendance at the yearly holiday brunch. I just said, I'll let you know. I didn't. In all honesty, I was finished explaining things. They detested that, because it is deafening when someone you used to control is silent. Dad's attempt to change the company's shipping source was the actual tipping point. He was unaware that our logistics company owned the vendor. I therefore witnessed every correspondence and every exchange. And when they attempted to cut expenses and get around terms, I turned it off firmly, silently. Dad became furious and called the vendor, wanting to know why they were no longer given priority. I took the call. He stopped. You? Yes, I said coolly. I now oversee the prioritization of clients, and in my opinion, your business hasn't merited it. A long pause ensued. Do you work for them? No, I replied. I am in charge of that division. He remained silent after that, simply hung up. I grinned as well, since I was certain that his silence wasn't due to uncertainty. Fear was the cause. At last, he was beginning to understand what was going on. That the girl they disregarded, and forgot wasn't just able to stand on her own 2 feet. She stood over them. I was invited to a family company strategy meeting later that week. Written on embossed paper and presented by hand, it seemed to be meant to wow me. I almost burst out laughing. I didn't answer. Rather, I had a meeting with my attorney. The documentation was almost complete. We had no intention of attempting a hostile takeover. It would have been untidy. No, we were infiltrating covertly through the openings they created. We gained access through unpaid debts, through ongoing legal proceedings. They neglected to study vendor contracts. Through some secret deal that would give, me majority power. They were unaware that they had signed it. That was invisibility's beauty. I was memorizing everything while they were busy forgetting me. And I had almost finished being kind. When I got there, the meeting was already underway. They were surprised that I showed up. Jessica's expression, with her eyebrows up and her awkward attempted smile when she felt surrounded, was rather telling. Brian's eyes seldom left his phone. My parents looked at each other as if I were an unwelcome inconvenience that they would have to cope with in the future. I didn't sit down at all. I carefully unzipped the leather folder in my hand and laid the papers all signed, indexed, and labeled out on the table. My father regarded them as though they were written in a foreign language as I slid them across the gleaming surface toward him. What is this? In a rough voice, he inquired. I looked him in the eye. Command, My mom frowned as she leaned forward. What is under control? I didn't blink when I glanced at her. The business, quiet. The sort of air that, like a rubber band about to break, strains and twists. I'm kidding, Brian whispered. You're not even associated with the I am. I cut in with ease. Had been for several months. I was purchasing your debt while you were mishandling contracts and rerouting money. You were establishing alliances with vendors, removing exclusive terms from service agreements. Most significantly, I struck a deal with the one investor you haven't yet soiled. I looked at my dad. Is he your regular supplier? He is no longer merely a supplier. He has a stake in it. And he gave me a copy of his shares. Now, Jessica leaned closer and spoke in a panicked voice. That is absurd. Tell her that she can't do this, Dad. He can't, I said. The documentation has already been submitted, confirmed, and the majority is mine. As he raised one of the papers, my father's hand shook a little. Silently, he scanned his lips. Then he dropped the paper like a man who realizes he's been sleepwalking right into a cliff. He hissed, You played tricks on us. No, I replied. I researched you, and I put everything I had learned to work. After that, they didn't really argue, because they knew in their hearts. They had been ignoring me, making fun of my opinions, and keeping me off the table for years. However, they failed to teach me how to remain faithful to those who treated me like a shadow. I therefore ceased to be faithful and became intelligent. I went on, I'm not here to ruin you. I'm here to preserve what remains. However, I'm no longer doing it in silence or for free. I looked across at Jessica. You're gone. Your expenditures have exposed us to legal danger. Her face went white. You're suspended indefinitely, Brian. If you decide to come back to work here, you will begin at the bottom. An intern. No benefits, no title. He parted his lips, then shut them again. Finally, I turned to my parents. You, on the other hand, will keep a tiny symbolic stake. This is sufficient to ensure that your names are recorded on paper. However, the daily, I now own it, each and every call, every choice, each and every dollar. My mom blinked quickly, as if she were trying to shake off a bad dream. What are you doing? I looked at her for a while. Because I've been begging for a place at the table for years. Additionally, you ensured that there was never a chair. Quietly, I collected the remaining documents. Oh, and I'll be relocating to the upper office. The one that you formerly owned. It struck them at that very instant. I could see it descend, like a wave crashing ashore. Now standing at the head of the table, taking everything they wouldn't share, was their daughter, whom they had trained to be invisible, not out of rage, in charge. Jessica started crying. Brian rushed out. In stunned silence, my mother sagged back in her chair. I had never seen my father appear so little. I didn't wince, because this was not rage-fueled retaliation. It was patience molded into justice. I passed the portrait of my grandfather, the company's founder, in the hallway as I left the boardroom. He used his hands to build the company. Sincere labor. There were nights when I was unable to sleep. When I was younger, he would sneak peppermint candies to me and say, You have that same spark. You'll be in charge of this place one day. When he stated it, they chuckled. I didn't. And now? I was now exactly where he had always predicted me to be. For the first time in what seemed like years, I let out a breath as I entered my new office and closed the door. The silence was full, not empty, packed with everything I had regained, everything they had attempted to take away, and all I had won. Allow them to sit in their shame. I needed to get some work done. It was not long before the ramifications started. The following day, it began with phone calls. Dozens of phone calls came in, from sellers who learned all of a sudden that Jessica's signature was no longer reliable. Staff members, both anxious and curious, inquired about the accuracy of the rumors. That I was in command now. I didn't answer right away. I let the quiet speak for itself. They still had a family group chat, and by Friday it was blowing up. I lingered long enough to witness the blossoming of despair. My mother's messages pleading for a talk. Half-hearted, let's just have a conversation. Jessica is typing in all caps about how I had betrayed them, and that without the family name, I couldn't have achieved anything. It's funny, given that they pretended I wasn't involved for years. I put the phone down and muted the chat. Then the actual fissures appeared. Our accountant, who had been faithful to my father for many years, discreetly sent me an email with a list of anomalies she had discovered in Jessica's spending records for the previous 5 years. I suspected abuse, but this was unprecedented. This was audacious, unapproved travel expenses. Lavish hotel stays are incorrectly listed as business development expenses. Personal purchases fall within the corporate image category. I went over each line. I went over each line one by one. I didn't feel as angry as I had previously. I didn't feel content. I had no feelings. Because catching her wasn't the goal. This was about exposing the decay. They made a concerted effort to hide behind hollow grins and holiday greetings that were always signed with love. I had our legal counsel look over the materials on Monday of the following week. We canceled Jessica's business credit card by Tuesday. Every vendor access point no longer has her name on it. That night, she called me 5 times. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I could never make the data speak for itself. Brian then attempted to enter. He literally arrived at work as if nothing had occurred. He wore that cocky attitude he had always worn like a fragrance as he walked past reception, until he discovered his keycard was deactivated when he arrived at the lift. From my office, I watched the camera feed. For a long time, he remained there in shock, as though he was trying to comprehend that the structure, which was the pride and pleasure of his family, had moved on without him, that his last name alone did not grant him admission. He didn't knock. He went out. He sent me an email later that evening. No subject line. One sentence only. Your point has been made. After a moment of staring, I archived it. The thing about power, genuine power, was that you didn't have to make the announcement. You didn't have to wave it directly at someone. You simply had to experience it. Allow them to experience the lack of control they used to take for granted. But underneath it all, something changed. I would find myself gazing out the corner office window during the quiet times, which were the few hours in between emails and strategy sessions. This was the life I had always envisioned, the one I thought would make things better. However, it didn't. Not at all. I simply gained perspective from it. I discovered it had been more than a year since I had last spoken to my childhood best buddy. It had been months since I had gone trekking, painted, or even had a complete day off. Regaining what was rightfully mine had been the whole focus of my existence. What else was there, now that I had it? I resumed therapy at that point, not because I was damaged. However, I didn't want retaliation to be the only thing that occupied the place where love formerly resided. You've spent years running towards something, observed the therapist, an elderly woman named Ruth, who was seated across from me. Now that you're here, what happens? I was unsure of how to respond. However, I was troubled by the question in the best way. People started to get in touch in the weeks that followed. Some reached out opportunistically, while others did so sincerely. I received messages from former coworkers I hardly remembered saying they were proud of me. You were always the quiet one, but I could tell you noticed everything, one person even said. That stuck with me. My dad didn't give me a call. He failed to appear. However, I knew he was observing. I observed the subtle changes in the board's voting habits, the way some of his allies abruptly began to treat me with more deference. But my mom? She arrived at the workplace. Not invited. For more than an hour, she stood in the lobby with a package of cookies from the bakery she knew I enjoyed as a kid. I shook my head when my assistant offered to allow her up. I said plainly, I'm not ready. Because you can't just open the door of forgiveness at the first knock. Until you've constructed a new house for your heart, it can occasionally be a key you carry in your pocket. And I hadn't arrived yet. However, I was nearer. The silence brought a sense of tranquility. I made my own coffee in the break room in the mornings, not because I had to, but rather because I wanted to reminisce about what it was like to do something basic with my own hands. We had a rooftop, so I spent the evenings sitting there and taking in the city lights, by themselves, content, no longer requiring their approval, no more trying to get a seat at their table, since I had constructed my own. And perhaps just possibly that was sufficient. I can't recall the precise moment I lost my anger. It took time for it to happen. I didn't give a speech that neatly summed up years of pain, nor was there an enchanted dawn when everything suddenly made sense. I've learned that healing is silent. It's not loud or dramatic. The situation isn't some last-minute conflict. It's the realization that your chest no longer feels so heavy when you wake up one morning, that the quiet in your life is peace rather than loneliness. My mornings these days begin slowly. I breathe, light a candle, and leave the windows open even in cool weather. I don't check my phone before drinking my coffee. For once, I don't need someone else's words to express how I feel, so I listen to music without lyrics. I've taken a temporary leave of absence from the office. I remain seated at the board. I continue to influence important choices. However, I have trusted individuals to manage the day-to-day operations. I have trusted individuals who value people more than their ancestry or last name. People who respect both paths equally don't care if you were born into power or if you had to work extremely hard to get it. What about Jessica? Brian? Since the last board meeting, we haven't had a straight conversation. Yes, I do hear things. I've heard that Brian launched a consultancy that no one is actually hiring for, and that Jessica's marriage is difficult. I don't rejoice in their demise. No more. Once you've healed, you no longer crave karma. You see that your goal is not to alleviate their suffering. I received a letter from my mother, not an SMS message. It's not an email. An actual letter written by hand. Like her, it was unkempt.droning.ambivalent. She didn't offer me the direct apology I had longed for during sleepless nights. However, I discerned a hint of regret in her words. I'm sorry. Perplexity. Disgrace. I didn't know how to love you the way you deserve to be loved, she added. Now I see that. I placed the folded letter into the back of a journal that I no longer use. I didn't respond. However, I also didn't throw it away. Sometimes that's what forgiving looks like. No reunion. This isn't an emotional reunion, simply letting go of the past to prevent it from tainting your future. What about the future? Mine doesn't look anything like what I imagined it would when I was a teenager, dreaming of being famous to prove them wrong. Retaliation fantasies are no longer necessary for me to feel complete. I now reside in a modest cottage outside the city, far enough away to hear crickets at night, but still close enough to the firm. I tend to my garden. I'm a painter. People who never ask me to prove myself make me laugh. I sleep next to someone who, despite my messiness, exhaustion, or fear, treats me as though I'm enough. You don't have to be strong all the time, he once told me, and I believed him for the first time in my life. I've learned to accept the pain as a reminder rather than a chain. That version of myself, the woman who gave and was always last in line, the girl who waited on the steps over Christmas, while everyone else got presents, was never weak. She had patience. She is now at liberty. I still occasionally receive invitations to family gatherings, birthdays, marriages, and anniversaries. I give them a quick look, grin a little, and put them in a drawer I never open. I have a family of my own now. A selected one. People who don't need me to be smaller so they can shine, who sit with me when I fail, and who applaud when I triumph. And this is what I've discovered, and what I hope you remember long after this tale is over. You're not inherently unworthy if your family rejects you. It indicates that your value was too great for them to see. It represents your tenderness, courage, and fortitude qualities that they were never meant to define. And if you're currently sitting in solitude, wondering why you've always been left behind, know this. You're not by yourself. You're not invisible. You are neither too much nor too little. You are just what you needed to be in order to end the cycle, overcome it, and make a better decision. I used to be the backup plan, the mistake, and the forgotten daughter. Right now, their shame was transformed into a legacy by me, the woman. I also did it without their consent, without their cheers, without their affection. Only me. Unreservedly me.